What if everything you thought was real about your marriage dissolved into a million shattered pieces? Not with a bang, but with a single, casual sentence spoken over unlimited breadsticks. That's how my world ended, or rather, fundamentally changed forever. Our Friday night ritual, the comforting buzz of our favorite Italian chain, suddenly felt like a stage for a slow-motion car crash. The usual booth by the window, the familiar smells of garlic and Parmesan, it all became a surreal backdrop to the biggest betrayal of my life. I'm Ethan, 32, and I'd been married to Chloe for 6 incredible years. Or so I thought. We had the picture-perfect life, a nice apartment in the suburbs, 2 cars, decent jobs. We were even dreaming about having kids soon. And then, she dropped a bomb that shattered everything I believed about the woman sleeping beside me every night. The waiter had just brought our salad and those irresistible breadsticks. I was lost in the weighty decision between chicken parmigiana and shrimp scampi, completely oblivious to the earthquake about to hit. Then, Chloe looked up from her menu. She had this weird, almost proud smile. And she said the words that would unravel us. "I've decided I'm going to be a surrogate mother for Noah." I laughed. A genuine laugh, because surely, this was a joke. But Chloe wasn't laughing back. She just stared at me with this expectant look, like I was supposed to congratulate her. Noah, let me be crystal clear, was her ex-boyfriend from college. The guy she dated for 3 years before me. The one she'd always called her first real love in that nostalgic, wistful tone that always made my stomach clench. And now she wanted to carry his child, grow his baby inside her body for 9 months. She was telling me this over unlimited breadsticks, like it was no big deal. At all. I put down my fork. My appetite gone. "Repeat that," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, because surely I'd misheard. My wife couldn't possibly be telling me she wanted to be a surrogate for her ex-boyfriend. But she repeated it word for word. She even added that Noah and his wife, Sophia, couldn't have children naturally, that they'd been trying for years, and it was breaking their hearts, and she just wanted to help them. I just sat there, processing. The restaurant buzzed around me. Families laughing, couples on dates, normal people having normal Friday nights. And I asked the most obvious question, the one that screamed in my head, "When exactly were you planning to discuss this with me?" She looked genuinely confused, like I was being unreasonable. She told me she'd met with them twice already. Coffee last week, dinner 3 days ago. She'd researched the medical procedures. She'd made up her mind. And I was just finding out now over pasta. "Why her?" I asked. "Why him? Specifically your ex? Aren't there professional surrogates? Is there no one else in the entire world who could do this?" She got defensive instantly. She said I was being jealous and immature. That this was about helping people create a family. That I should be proud of her for being so selfless and compassionate. Selfless. That was the word she used. Like volunteering to carry your ex-boyfriend's baby while married to someone else was some humanitarian mission. Like I was the villain for having questions about this insane situation. The waiter came back to take our order. I just stared at him blankly until he awkwardly walked away. I leaned forward, my voice low and tight. "Are you getting paid for this?" She looked offended. "No, of course not. This is a gift. I'm doing this out of love for old friends who are suffering." Out of love, those exact words. Something cold clicked in my brain right then. This wasn't about helping strangers. Or even just friends. This was about Noah. Specifically Noah, her first love, her ex, the one that got away. And suddenly, 6 years of marriage felt like an elaborate lie. I asked her point blank, "Do you still have feelings for him?" She rolled her eyes, told me I was being paranoid, that she loved me, that this had nothing to do with our marriage, that I was making everything about my insecurities instead of supporting her noble decision. Noble decision. Like I was supposed to smile and nod while my wife got pregnant with another man's child. Like that was a normal thing supportive husbands do. I could feel anger building, a furnace roaring inside, but I kept it down. Kept my voice level. Because I was forming a plan even then. I told her I needed time to think about it. That this was huge, affected both of us, and we needed to discuss it properly. She said fine, but her tone made it clear she thought I was overreacting. That she expected me to come around eventually. That my opinion was more formality than an actual factor in her decision. We ate the rest of the meal in silence. Or rather, she ate. I pushed food around my plate. I paid the bill with our joint credit card, one of the last times I'd use it, though I didn't know it then. We drove home separately. We'd taken both cars, her from her office, me from the gym. The whole drive, I was thinking about what I was going to do. How I was going to handle this. Because one thing was crystal clear, my wife had checked out of our marriage. She'd made a major life decision without me. She'd been meeting with her ex behind my back, and she expected me to just accept it. Instead of going home, I drove to my brother's place across town. Showed up at his door at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. He took one look at my face and let me in without questions. I told him everything. The Olive Garden conversation, Chloe's secret meetings with Noah, her complete disregard for my feelings. My brother got angrier and angrier on my behalf, saying things like, "Is she insane? And you can't let her do this." But I was already past anger. I was in cold calculation mode now. I told my brother I had a plan. I was going to tell Chloe I'd thought about it and I was okay with it. That I supported her decision. And while she was busy playing happy family with Noah and Sophia, I was going to quietly file for divorce, freeze our accounts, remove her from my insurance, and be gone before she even realized what was happening. My brother looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Asked if I was sure, if maybe we should try couples therapy first. I just laughed. You don't need therapy when your wife wants to have her ex-boyfriend's baby. You need a lawyer. I slept on my brother's couch that night. Didn't even tell Chloe where I was. Let her wonder. Let her worry. When she called at midnight, I didn't answer. When she texted asking if I was okay, I just replied, staying at my brother's. Need space. Talk tomorrow. And left it at that. I lay there in the dark, thinking about all the signs I'd missed. All the times she'd mentioned Noah casually. All the times she'd been on her phone late at night. All the times she'd said she was meeting friends, but been vague about who. I realized this had been building for a while. This wasn't sudden. This was something she'd been planning and wanting, and I'd been completely blind to it. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to protect myself. Protect my assets. Protect my future. Because Chloe had made her choice. And it wasn't me. It was never going to be me again. Not really. Not after this. I drove home around noon. Found Chloe in the kitchen making lunch. She looked at me hopefully, like I was about to tell her I'd come to my senses and would support her surrogacy plan. I almost felt bad for what I was about to do. Almost. But then I remembered her face at Olive Garden. How casual she'd been. How little my feelings mattered. And I smiled. I told her I'd thought about it, and if this was really what she wanted, I'd support her. The relief on her face was genuine. She hugged me, told me she knew I'd understand eventually, that this was going to be beautiful, that Noah and Sophia were so grateful. And I hugged her back, knowing it was probably the last time I'd ever hold my wife. Because the woman in my arms wasn't my wife anymore. She was someone else entirely. Someone I didn't recognize. Someone who'd chosen her ex-boyfriend over her husband and convinced herself it was noble. I spent the rest of that weekend being the perfect supportive husband. Asking questions about the procedure, nodding along when she talked about timelines and medical appointments. Even agreeing to meet Noah and Sophia for dinner the following week. All while mentally cataloging everything we owned. Every asset we had. Every account in both our names. Preparing for the war she didn't see coming. On Monday morning, I called in sick to work, something I never did. And I drove to the law offices of Eleanor Vance, a divorce attorney my brother had found over the weekend, known for being absolutely ruthless. I told her everything. Every detail. Every text message. Every lie. She leaned back in her chair and said, "Let's make sure you come out of this okay." And for the first time since Friday night, I felt like I was going to survive this. Like I wasn't the victim in this story, but the one who got away. Eleanor Vance didn't waste any time. By Tuesday afternoon, I was signing divorce papers in her downtown office. papers that would be served to Chloe at her workplace within 48 hours. I remember Eleanor looking at me and saying this was going to get ugly, that Chloe would panic when she realized she'd lost control. I just nodded. I was ready. I'd spent 3 days being the perfect, supportive husband while secretly preparing to burn our marriage to the ground. And honestly, it felt good. It felt powerful. It felt like I was taking control of my own life instead of being a passenger in Chloe's twisted fantasy. Wednesday morning, I went to our bank, the one where we'd had a joint account for 5 years. Where we'd deposited wedding gift checks and saved for vacations and kept our emergency fund. I moved every single dollar I'd personally contributed into a new account at a different bank. Left her with access to only her own deposits. Completely legal, according to Eleanor. Then I called our insurance company and removed her from my health insurance policy. From my car insurance. From everything. And with each phone call, I felt lighter. Like I was shedding a weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Thursday morning arrived. I went to work like normal. Sat through meetings, answered emails, made small talk with coworkers. All while knowing that in a few hours, Chloe's entire world was going to implode. And right around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. It just said served with a thumbs up emoji. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom. I was shaking. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. From the realization that there was no going back now. I'd done it. I'd filed for divorce, and my wife didn't even see it coming. I got 17 calls from Chloe between 2:30 and 5 p.m. Didn't answer a single one. Let every call go to voicemail. The messages went from confused to angry, to desperate to enraged. She was screaming in some of them, saying I was insane, that I was overreacting, that we needed to talk about this like adults. But the time for talking had passed the moment she decided to carry her ex-boyfriend's baby without consulting her husband. I stayed late at work on purpose. Didn't go home until almost 8 p.m. When I pulled up to our apartment building, my brother was already there, waiting in his truck, just like we planned. We went upstairs together. The apartment was empty. Chloe's car was gone. But she'd left destruction in her wake. Picture frames smashed on the floor. My clothes thrown everywhere. The TV remote broken in half. Classic signs of someone who'd completely lost control. My brother just looked around and said, "She took it well," which made me laugh, despite everything. I started packing my essentials. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, important documents from our file cabinet, my grandfather's watch from my nightstand. I was loading boxes into my brother's truck when Chloe pulled up with 2 other people in her car. Even from the parking lot, I could see it was Noah and Sophia. She brought them to confront me. Brought her ex-boyfriend and his wife to our home to gang up on me. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. They came upstairs together, this weird little trio. Chloe's face was blotchy from crying, but her eyes were hard and angry. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing. Said I was ruining everything over nothing, that I was being cruel and vindictive. Noah stepped forward like he was going to say something, this tall guy with glasses and a receding hairline. Nothing special, honestly. And I just held up my hand. We talk through lawyers now. All of us. If you want to communicate with me, you go through Eleanor Vance. I handed Noah one of Eleanor's business cards that I'd been keeping in my pocket specifically for this moment. Sophia looked incredibly uncomfortable. Kept glancing between Chloe and Noah like she was seeing something she didn't want to see. She asked quietly if maybe they should give us privacy, but Chloe snapped at her. No, they need to hear this. He needs to understand what he's destroying. I realized right then that Chloe had completely rewritten the narrative in her head. She genuinely believed I was the villain here. That I was the one breaking up our marriage over her generous gesture of carrying another man's child. My brother started carrying boxes down to his truck, and I followed with my own stuff. Chloe tried to block the doorway. Said I couldn't just leave, that we had a lease together, that we had responsibilities. I reminded her that, according to the divorce papers she'd been served 4 hours ago, I was well within my rights to leave. That I'd already paid my half of the rent through the end of the lease. That everything from this point forward went through our lawyers. She started crying again, real tears this time, saying she didn't understand why I was doing this. Why I wouldn't just support her. Why I had to ruin everything. I moved past her with my last box and stopped at the door. Turned back and looked at all three of them standing in my living room. Chloe with tears running down her face. Noah with his arm around her shoulders in a way that was definitely not appropriate for someone's ex-boyfriend. Sophia looking lost and confused. And I said, "You made your choice, Chloe. You chose him. You chose this. And now you get to live with it." I walked out and didn't look back. I moved into my brother's spare room that night. It felt like freedom. Felt like the first honest place I'd been in weeks. My brother ordered pizza, and we sat up until 2 a.m., drinking beer and talking about everything. About how blind I'd been. About how calculated Chloe's betrayal was. About how I was going to rebuild my life from scratch at 32. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, document signings, and asset divisions. Eleanor was vicious. She found out that Chloe had already spent $20,000 on the surrogacy process. Money from her own savings that she'd kept secret. Money she'd been setting aside for months, apparently, which proved this wasn't a sudden decision, but a long-planned betrayal. Eleanor used that in court. Showed the judge that Chloe had been planning this behind my back for potentially over a year. We also discovered that Chloe had moved out of our apartment completely, packed up all her stuff in one weekend while I was at my brother's place, and moved in with Noah and Sophia. Like some kind of sister-wife situation. Eleanor said this proved inappropriate relationship dynamics. Proved everything we needed to prove. The court date arrived 6 weeks after I'd filed. Fastest divorce hearing Eleanor had ever gotten, apparently. I sat there in my only suit, watching Chloe on the other side of the courtroom with her lawyer, some guy who looked fresh out of law school and completely overwhelmed. When the judge asked Chloe directly if she'd consulted with her husband before agreeing to be a surrogate for her ex-boyfriend, she had to admit she hadn't. Had to admit she'd met with them multiple times without telling me. Had to admit she'd already started the medical process. The judge's face was stone cold. Completely unimpressed. Eleanor brought up the fact that Chloe had moved in with Noah and Sophia, that she'd withdrawn $20,000 from her personal savings without disclosure, that she'd refused marriage counseling. Chloe's lawyer tried to argue that I'd been unnecessarily cruel, that freezing accounts and removing insurance was vindictive. But Eleanor countered that I'd only frozen accounts I'd personally contributed to, that I'd only removed her from insurance policies I paid for, that everything I'd done was completely legal and, frankly, restrained considering the circumstances. The judge took 15 minutes to deliberate, came back, and said, "Mrs. Foster, you have destroyed your marriage through your actions. You made major life decisions without your husband's input. You prioritized your ex-boyfriend over your spouse." And while Mr. Foster's response was swift and harsh, he acted within his legal rights. Then came the part that made it all worth it, the division of assets. We had about $70,000 in combined savings and investments, built up over 6 years. Eleanor had argued that since I'd been the primary earner and Chloe had already secretly withdrawn $20,000 for her surrogacy plan, the division should reflect that. And the judge agreed, awarded me $55,000 and gave Chloe just $15,000. I watched her face crumble when she heard that. Watched her realize that her grand romantic gesture had cost her everything. Her marriage. Her home. Her financial security. All for Noah. All for a man who was sitting in the back of the courtroom with his wife, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. I walked out of that courthouse a free man. Divorced. Single. $45,000 richer after legal fees. Eleanor shook my hand and said, "You stood up for yourself when it mattered." And I felt it. Felt the weight lifting. Felt like I could finally breathe again. Like the last 2 months of hell had been worth it just to get to this moment. This feeling of absolute liberation. 6 months passed after the divorce was finalized. 6 months of me rebuilding my entire life from scratch. I'd moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Got a promotion at work because I was suddenly putting in crazy hours with nothing else to do. Started going to the gym religiously. Even went on a few dates, though nothing serious. I thought I was done with the whole Chloe saga. Thought that chapter was closed forever. And then my phone rang on a random Tuesday evening. The caller ID said Sophia. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Some weird intuition that this wasn't a social call. Sophia's voice was shaking when she spoke. She was crying. And she said she needed to tell me something. Something I deserved to know. Something that had been eating at her for months. I sat down on my couch, because I could tell this was going to be bad. Could hear it in her voice. That desperate need to confess that people get when they can't carry a secret anymore. She told me she was divorcing Noah. That she'd filed papers 3 days ago. And that she'd found evidence. Actual proof. That Noah and Chloe had been having an affair the entire time. That the surrogacy was never really about surrogacy at all. It was a cover story. A way for them to be together. A way for Chloe to have Noah's baby while pretending it was some noble gesture. And my stomach dropped. Even though I'd suspected something like this, even though I'd known deep down that the whole situation was wrong, hearing it confirmed was different. Was worse somehow. Sophia kept talking, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in too long. She explained that she'd found text messages going back over a year. Messages between Noah and Chloe that were definitely not appropriate for exes or friends. Messages talking about how they'd never stopped loving each other. How they'd made a mistake breaking up in college. How they wished they could be together. And then, 3 months before the Olive Garden incident, they'd started planning. Planning how to make this happen. How to get Chloe pregnant with Noah's baby without anyone questioning it. The surrogacy story was perfect. Gave them an excuse to be together constantly. To have medical appointments together. To be intimate in a clinical setting. Except Sophia had found emails to a fertility clinic that weren't part of their official surrogacy plan. Found evidence that Noah and Chloe had gone to a different doctor, had done their own procedure. Had essentially created their own baby and planned to pass it off as a surrogate pregnancy. Sophia had only discovered all this because she'd found a second phone that Noah had hidden in his car. A burner phone with months of messages and photos that proved everything. I sat there, processing this information. This revelation that my ex-wife hadn't just wanted to be a surrogate. She'd wanted to have her ex-boyfriend's baby and raise it with him. Wanted to completely blow up 2 marriages for some twisted fairy tale reunion. Sophia was apologizing to me, saying she should have known, should have questioned things, should have talked to me before any of this started. But Noah had assured her that everything was legitimate, that my wife and I were on board, that everyone was on the same page. I asked Sophia what she was going to do with this information. And she said she'd already done it. She'd filed a lawsuit against both Noah and Chloe for fraud and emotional distress. Had sent all the evidence to a lawyer. Had contacted the fertility clinic they'd used. And the whole thing was about to become very public. Very messy. Very career-destroying for both of them. And I won't lie. Hearing that gave me a savage sense of satisfaction. Of justice. Of cosmic karma finally catching up to the people who tried to destroy my life. The news broke 2 weeks later. Local news picked up the story. Former couple commits surrogacy fraud was the headline I saw when my brother sent me the link. And there were photos of Noah and Chloe leaving court, both of them. Looking utterly destroyed. Apparently, Noah had lost his job at the engineering firm where he'd worked for 8 years, couldn't survive the scandal. And Chloe had been let go from her position at the marketing agency. Something about bringing negative publicity to the company. And they were both facing a lawsuit from Sophia that could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I didn't follow the case obsessively, but I heard updates through mutual friends. Heard that Noah and Chloe had moved in together officially, that they were broke, that they were struggling, that the baby had been born, a daughter, perfectly healthy, but born into absolute chaos. And I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no jealousy. Just a weird, empty relief that I'd gotten out when I did. That I wasn't tied to that disaster. That I'd chosen to save myself instead of drowning with them. 8 months after Sophia's phone call, I was at a coffee shop near my apartment, a place I'd started going every Saturday morning for their espresso. I was reading on my tablet when someone sat down across from me. I looked up. It was Chloe. Looking exhausted. And older, somehow. Her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. She had a baby carrier next to her with a sleeping infant inside. We stared at each other for a long moment. She asked if she could talk to me. Just for 5 minutes. I should have said no. Should have gotten up and left. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what she could possibly say to justify everything she'd done. Everything she destroyed. Chloe looked down at her coffee cup and started talking, her voice quiet and defeated. She told me everything. That she'd been in love with Noah the whole time we were married. That she'd reconnected with him 2 years ago at a college reunion and they'd started their affair shortly after. That the surrogacy was a cover story they'd concocted together. That she'd lied to everyone, including Sophia, including me, including herself, about what she was really doing. She said she'd convinced herself it was romantic. That it was some great love story. That fighting for the person you really loved was noble and brave. But now she saw it for what it was, selfish and destructive and cruel. And she'd lost everything. Her marriage. Her career. Her reputation. Her friends. Even Noah, who'd turned out to be not the fairy tale prince she'd built up in her head, but just a cheater and a liar like her. I listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, she looked at me with these desperate eyes and said, "You were a better husband than I deserved. Better than I appreciated." And I threw it all away for a fantasy that wasn't even real. I could tell she wanted me to say something comforting. Wanted absolution. Wanted me to tell her it was okay or that I forgave her. But I didn't feel any of those things. I felt distant and detached, like I was watching a stranger confess to crimes that had happened to someone else. I stood up and picked up my tablet. Looked down at her and her baby. This child that could have been mine in another life, in another timeline where Chloe had been honest and faithful. And I said, "You made your choices, Chloe. You destroyed everything yourself. I just refused to go down with you." And I walked away. Left her sitting there in that coffee shop with her baby and her regrets. And I didn't look back. Because there was nothing back there for me anymore. Nothing but ashes and mistakes and a life I'd successfully escaped. That night, I had a date with a woman named Rachel, who worked in graphic design. Our 5th date. We went to a nice Italian restaurant. Not Olive Garden. Never Olive Garden again. And over wine and pasta, I realized I was happy. Excited about my future. Grateful for everything that had happened, because it had led me here. To this moment. To this freedom. My real revenge wasn't the divorce. Or the money. Or watching Chloe's life fall apart. My real revenge was being happy while she lived with the consequences of every terrible choice she'd made. And that felt better than any legal victory, better than any amount of money, better than anything I could have planned or orchestrated. Because it was real. It was earned. It was mine. And nobody could take it away from me. Not Chloe, not Noah, not anyone. And that realization, sitting across from Rachel, while she laughed at something I'd said, that was the real ending to this story. Not dramatic or explosive, but quiet and true and perfect. I'm still wrapping my head around the sheer audacity of it all. If you found yourself in a situation this insane, what would your first move be? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments.